This is the Louis T. Network. Hey, either you're outside or you're
in the lab room.
Who else could it be? But me, your me. Louis T, welcome. You are in the lab room, of course. I'm your host, Lou. Thank you for joining me on this In the Lab Room exclusive debate, which I honestly don't really think is much of a debate, but we're going to have this discussion anyway because there are a lot of differing opinions out there as to whether Calvin Johnson, aka Hubba Trump, won't get to do that very often anymore, deserves to be enshrined in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. To me, I don't think this is much of a debate. And I've heard so many different talking heads and different media types talking about Calvin Johnson. Is he, isn't he a Hall of Famer? And you gotta be kidding me, right? I mean, and I wanna know what you guys think, and if you think Calvin Johnson is in fact a Hall of Famer or not. We all kind of got caught up in the Peyton Manning retirement, that the Calvin Johnson retiring kind of went under the radar, but he retired right around the same time as Peyton Manning. I want to say he actually made it official that same exact day that Peyton Manning did, but yet, no one was really talking about his decision to hang it up. But when I look at his career, 9 years of service, and I think that's what a lot of people are getting caught up on, the numbers, and because he didn't play 13, 14 years in the league, his numbers aren't going to stand up to some of the other guys in the Hall of Fame. Now, I will say this, you've got some guys that got in a long time ago that their numbers pale in comparison to the new age receivers, but it was a different time then. Passing yards were harder to come by, so they kind of adjusted for that. And now when you look at a guy's numbers today, they're inflated 10 times what the numbers were in the 70s for a guy like Stallworth or a guy like Lynn Swann, who got in eons ago. These guys now are expected to have over 15,000 receiving yards. They're expected to have over 100 receiving touchdowns. They're expected to be 10-time Pro Bowlers and 5-time All-Pros. And look, forget about all of that stuff, okay? My criteria for the Pro Football Hall of Fame is as such. If you put together at least 7 years of service in the league, and of those 7 years, 5 of them were dominant, you need to be in the discussion as a Hall of Famer. You don't have to play 11, 13 years to be described as a Hall of Famer. You don't have to devote your life and want to play football until you can't play anymore. The goal is to get as much money as you possibly can, have as much fun playing the game as you possibly can, and get out while you still can. Don't let the game quit you, you quit the game. That's what the name of the game should be. Now, I know a lot of guys love the game so much that they can't envision stopping until they can't do it any longer, like a Tom Brady, like a Peyton Manning. I get it. I understand that. But there are guys out there that make a boatload of money, like Calvin Johnson, who can say, hey, you know what? I've made my fair share of money. I went through a number of injuries. I'm tired of having surgeries. I feel good right now where I am in my career, in my life, more importantly. And I feel like I've done enough as a football player. I've had enough fun. I've made enough money that I can walk away with my head held high and say, you know what? I feel good, in body. It might not be as good as I felt when I came into the league 9 years ago, but I feel good enough to walk away. I still got all my limbs. I still have my whole mental capacity. I made enough money. I'm good. I feel good, and I'm at peace with leaving the game at this present time. Good for him. But the man had over 11,000 yards receiving. If you want to be technical, 11,776 to be exact. 83 career touchdowns. Again, that's not going to resonate when you look at Randy Moss's numbers, when you look at Marvin Harrison's numbers, when you look at T.O.'s numbers, Jerry Rice, when you look at all of those guys' numbers, his numbers are going to pale in comparison to them. But keep in mind, Jerry Rice played like 18 years in the NFL. Keep in mind, Terrell Owens he's still to this day trying to get back into the NFL. If a team picked up the phone, called Terrell Owens right now, he'd want to play football. So he was one of those guys that wanted to continue to play. He played a boatload of years in the NFL, did Terrell Owens. So again, you got all of these guys that played for a number of years. Calvin Johnson did some extraordinary things that we've never seen an NFL receiver built like him with the skill set that he possesses. And I don't know if we ever will see a guy that's 6'5", 240 pounds that can run a sub 4.40. I don't know if we'll ever see that again. And the way he dominated the league over the life of his career, come on, are we really having this discussion? Okay, in 2012, when the Lions weren't very good, and you knew who was getting the football each and every single week, Calvin Johnson went out and set an NFL record for most receiving yards in a season with 1,964, almost eclipsing a mark that we thought would never even be approached. 2,000 yards receiving in one season. He almost did that. I don't see anyone else even coming close to that number. You'll have some guys that may hit 1,800. This guy almost hit 2,000 yards in a season. Keep in mind, who else was there to distract defenses and keep them off of him? Nobody, yet he still went out and dominated week in and week out. One of 3 receivers in NFL history to have multiple seasons of 1,600 yards receiving or more in a career. So you're talking about a guy that was dominant in his career and throughout his career, most consecutive games with 100 yards or more with 8 in a season, and most 100-yard receiving games in an entire season with 11, tied with Michael Irvin. So again, you're talking about a guy that has been dominant throughout his career. Fastest receiver to 10,000 yards in his career. Took him 8 years to do that. Eclipsed 11,000 last year. Look, at the end of the day, it took him 115 games to do that. Look, at the end of the day, this to me isn't a discussion, all right? The guy's a Hall of Fame football player. When you talk about the NFL over the last decade, you can't talk about the wide receiver position without talking about Megatron. And he was the best receiver for a stretch there. There was about a good 5 to 6 year stretch where if you said best receiver in the league, who were you going to say? I mean, you could throw out a bunch of names, but at the top of that list was going to be Calvin Johnson. And to me, when you talk about a career and how it spans over a 7 to 10 to 15 year period, if there is a period of dominance in there, which you got out of Calvin Johnson, to me, the discussion isn't very strong if you're talking about this guy not being a Hall of Famer. Look, the numbers, you need to adjust the numbers for a guy that played 9 seasons in the NFL. I don't want to hear that his numbers aren't up to par with such and such. Did such and such play 9 seasons in the NFL? Because if he didn't, if he played 13, of course he's going to have more receiving yards. Of course he's going to have more touchdowns. Of course his numbers are going to be a little bit more than Calvin Johnson. But what did he do over his first 9 years of his career? Does his numbers look like Calvin Johnson's over the first 9 years of his career? Because if they don't, then we don't need to have a discussion. The comp isn't comparable. So to me, it's really simple. Calvin Johnson is a Hall of Famer. If you ask me, he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. He's not going to get in. They're going to make him wait. You know how these Hall of Fame balloting groups have their egos and they want to show their power and they want to flex their muscles. Hey, we have the power to get you in or keep you out of the Hall of Fame. And I believe because he retired early, they're going to try to penalize him for that. But at the end of the day, Calvin Johnson is a Hall of Fame football player, and he will get in, and he will have a bust, and he deserves to have it because the guy was a phenomenal wide receiver, the best we've probably seen over the last 10 years, the most dominant by far, and a guy that could routinely make the toughest catches in traffic look easy. Triple coverage, no problem. Double coverage, are you kidding me? If it was single coverage, you could forget about it. That was Calvin Johnson's game, and that's why he got the nickname and one of the best nicknames given out to a wide receiver. And so, I want to hear from you guys. Do you believe Calvin Johnson is a Hall of Fame receiver? To me, in my mind, there's no doubt about it. That man is a surefire Hall of Famer. But do you think he deserves a gold jacket in 5 years or more when he is up for consideration for the Pro Football Hall of Fame? That's going to do it for me. I am Louis T. Thank you for joining me on this program. If it happens in the National Football League, whether big or small, we cover it all here in the lab room. Come back and join me as I continue to break down anything and everything in the National Football League. I've got more players to break down, getting back to the draft talk now that free agency is starting to wind down and we're getting into that second, third tier, that clearance rack period of free agency. Now it's time to turn our attention back to the draft. I'm about to start doing that here in a second. See you in a bit. There's plenty more where that came from. While you're here, subscribe to the channel. If you want more Louis T, be sure to follow me on Twitter @InTheLabRoom, or you can like the Facebook page @InTheLabRoom. That's In the Lab Room on Facebook and @InTheLabRoom on Twitter. Don't forget, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so.
Mm-hmm.